Welcome to the Federal webinar, the 13th in the series of webinars we've been conducting over the last few months. I'm K.S. Dakshinamurthy. Rarely have we seen an Indian government stuck in a foreign policy situation which threatens to upend friendly relations with two of the country's most valued partners, the United States and Russia. The ongoing invasion of Ukraine by Russia squarely brings into focus India's dilemma and exposes a long-standing weakness in its foreign policy. For years, India has been running with the hare and hunting with the hound. Today, the hare and hound are tugging at New Delhi, asking for its support. And if the war stretches on, willy-nilly, a victim could be India. To cut it short, here is what it is in a nutshell. If India supports the US-led West and Ukraine, it will have to face the consequences of antagonizing Russia. That means India will have to face a prickly situation in its neighborhood without Moscow's protection. On the other hand, if India supports Russia, the carefully crafted relationship with the US over the last 3 decades will come to naught. This could leave Pakistan free to do what it wants to irritate India and Kashmir, for example. The extensive military ties with the US and India's economic links to the US will be completely undermined. At the moment, India is trying to play ball with both. But is this the way to go? And are there alternatives? It's a it's an existential conundrum. I would put it that way. To discuss this dilemma or the conundrum, we have with us today a panel of experts. And these are involved individuals who have spent the better part of their professional lives dealing with India's foreign policy in their day-to-day lives. So T.P. Srinivasan was Indian ambassador in Vienna for Austria and Slovenia between 2000 and 2004. This was followed by a memorable stint as permanent representative of India to the United Nations. He is currently Director, NSS Academy of Civil Services and Director General of the Kerala International Center in Thiruvananthapuram. Former Ambassador M. Ganapathy has served in a wide range of overseas assignments. He was in the Indian diplomatic mission in Moscow twice, once in 1977-78 as part of the undivided Soviet Union, and again between 1994 and 98. He was in the Russian Federation, and he's also served in several other capitals around the world. He's also served with the Indian Ministry of External Affairs over several terms. So, welcome, Mr. Srinivasan and Mr. Ganapathy. And Mr. Maruf Raza, I think is a well-known face on Indian television. He's a media commentator on global military and security issues. His talks range from the threat of terrorism to India, Pakistan, and the Kashmir issue, Sino-Indian relations, and he's recently launched a book last week. I suggest you take a look because it covers a wide gamut of, the entire gamut, I would say, of modern India-China relationship. And also he has done a lot and worked on what India should do to become a great power. So this is the panel, and we're all here waiting to hear from them. Sirs, what we generally do is that in the format is pretty simple. We give each one of you, a few minutes to make opening remarks. I mean, it could range from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what you need to say. Then, we'll have a discussion on what you have just spoken about. And then when there are questions, if there are questions, we'll take them. And then followed by a closing remarks. And that's how the format is. So let's start with Mr. Srinivasan, and sir, please, it's yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you and also to see old friends. I was very intrigued by the title of our webinar. I read it several times to figure out what exactly it means. India's foreign policy limitation. Did it show up in the Russian-Ukraine war? It sounded as though we are a party to the war. So we are not. And so our foreign policy has nothing to do with the war itself. So what you mean is, of course, the impact of it on India
Right.
And the famous dilemma you talked about. I also wrote about India's dilemma in this. But if you see the test of a policy is in the results of it, I could say we have done fairly well. In the United Nations, we often say, if you get a resolution which makes everybody equally unhappy, it will be a successful resolution. Equally happy you cannot get. I think our position is now made all the three parties equally unhappy. Nobody is happy, nobody is delighted that we are doing it. And also there is an understanding of India's position. And people do not generally remember that it was Mrs. Gandhi who set this policy. In 1979, I was present in Delhi when that process was taking place. Charan Singh had decided to tell off the Soviets when we heard about the occupation of Afghanistan. And Mrs. Gandhi changed it in 1 minute. Varanso walked into Charan Singh's room and said, Mr. Prime Minister, I just met Mrs. Gandhi and she has shown great understanding of the situation. And Charan Singh did not know where to go. He had a piece of paper and he was going to say, please get out of Afghanistan. So, and that moment I can never forget. So when people talk about this great brinkmanship, what she did in 79 was remarkable. And for 5 years, we supported the Soviet Union and nobody else. And you may remember at that time, the move in Delhi in certain circles was for the Prime Minister to go straight to Pakistan and launch a war against the Soviet Union. That was the kind of extreme things which were there. So over the years, what has changed is only our relationship with the United States. Quad was not there, and the US was indifferent to us. And so they cut off the Tarapur supply of nuclear material. And that was the only thing that the Americans could do to spite us for what we did. But the Americans really, Ambassador Narayanan was there in Washington. He was put to a very great difficulties. And he was asked, when have you said even once Soviet troops would get out of Afghanistan? So no, we never said. We said no country should occupy another country. Always there should be things like that. And so the Americans said, if you show me one sentence saying Soviet Union should leave Afghanistan, then we will normalize our relations. Anyway, these are old days. When you become old, you remember old things. But this is the fact. The fact is that in spite of everything that has changed, we have this feeling that we ought to be grateful to the Russia because of Soviet Union, because it was Soviet vetoes that kept us floating for several years. And we can never forget that and never be ungrateful for that. Kashmir, Goa, Bangladesh, whichever you take, if there was no Soviet veto, we would have been in deep trouble. So it has a history. And at the same time, the explanation of vote, Tirumurthy's explanation of vote was a masterpiece in crafting, because he takes with the left hand what he gives with the right. He gives an abstention, and then he gives a positive vote from the left hand, saying these are reasons why which we cannot agree to this resolution. So I think we have played this quite well, but only time will tell how far this has affected us. In 1979 also, the non-aligned world was very angry with us. There was really no recognition of our concerns or our problems. And they're all quite happy to condemn India for being a Soviet satellite. But now nobody's saying that India is a Soviet satellite. We are not. But the calling of the Quad meeting by Biden is a very significant event just a couple of days ago. And he wanted to show that India stood outside the Quad. And that, I think, was a signal which shows how hurt he was. And of course, Putin is also not so happy with us, and Zelensky equally. So we are not done too badly. But whether this has an impact on the Russian-Ukraine war itself, of course, that isn't. We are only a witness or an observer. And there is this talk about our intervening or interceding, etc. These are just fancy ideas of Indians. We think that we are great guys who can go and sort out things, etc., which is not true. And today we had the demonstration of that, because we all thought that this ceasefire was ordered because Mr. Modi spoke to Mr. Putin. And then we realized that these children we want to save are far away from the place where there is a ceasefire. So in the morning, I was very happy and going around saying our kids will come back. But it's not so. So who asked for the ceasefire? We don't know. So such disappointments we have. And now we are in the war simply because of the Indians. And we are in the war because we did not even know there were so many of us, our students. It's normally when there is a bomb falling somewhere that we know there is an Indian there. But the Indians don't have a tendency to inform the embassy or report or anything like that. They keep away from the embassy as far as possible. So this was a big surprise for all of us. But also it's a reflection on our education system. Because why should everybody be a doctor and go to Ukraine to do that? It's a psychological, shall we say, illness, because we are not providing them enough education opportunities in India. And the old mindset that the medical profession is the best and the beautiful, and they borrow money and go and so on. So this is, in my view, that is the first lesson we ought to learn. We need to reform our education system to prevent this kind of problems. But we are now in the middle of it because of that. God forbid if something happens to these children, then I think Mr. Modi will have a very tough time to defend himself. Other than that, of course, we know that Mr. Putin is shifting his goalposts all the time, and you cannot catch up with him. Everybody thought, except Biden, I think everybody said there will be no war. I also wrote several times there will be no war. Because it was obvious what the solution was. Giving guarantees that they will not join NATO was not such a difficult thing. So hard thing for them to do, but it could have been possible. But then he shifted from there. He started talking about other things. And then finally he came with the truth. He wants the restoration of the Soviet might and glamour and glory and all that. And so we don't know where he stands and what his pursuit is and how far it will go. And it gives the impression that he'll go to the farthest possible in this. And that, of course, causes problem for everybody, the whole world, and we are also part of it. As far as our cooperation with Russia is concerned in the military field, which is something very significant, even though diversifying our supplies are very important because these MiG flights are called flying coffins. So it's a reminder of the fact that the technology that we are having are not very good. So it may be a good idea for us to diversify. But you have S-400 missiles and so on. So very up to date, another 26 agreements with Russians. Yeah. So compared to that, United States is still far behind, except for the Quad formation. So it's a mixed situation, and there is a dilemma for us. But I think we have pursued the situation realistically with some determination, keeping our contacts open. Because Jaishankar may be now like a Kissinger, the way he has traveled around the world. Unfortunately, he has not gained on the two important things, which is Ladakh and Afghanistan. But as I wrote somewhere, we have now become universal alignment is India's foreign policy. It was tongue-in-cheek, but that has not given the results. But certainly, he has done a wonderful job. He has an answer for every question and is determined in his pursuit. So my overall impression I want to convey to you is we are not doing too badly, and our foreign policy limitation is not putting us in a situation objectively is tough, but it has nothing to do with our foreign policy positions in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. Your take, Mr. Raza.
Well, good evening, Mr. Ambassador Srinivasan is a seasoned diplomat, so it's hard to match up with the understanding of people like him of how the game is played at bodies like the UN, where the world is constantly putting pressure on India for taking sides. My view is based on some hard, realistic assumptions. The first is, why is India being asked to take sides? Has the world gone after China, its major trading partner, to also take sides? China is abstaining, and China is trying to behave like the holy monk by, hear no evil, see no evil kind of thing. But the fact of the matter is that China is really a major fallback option for Russia. And that, apart from other things, has encouraged Russia into this adventure, because there are views that the joint statement between President Xi Jinping of China and President Putin just around the Winter Olympics and thereafter was kind of signal to the world that both these sides are almost allies. I want to underline a fact here that Russia is not going to be playing second fiddle to China. But with China on Russia's side, Russia has been further emboldened. Secondly, India is being asked to take sides when nobody has stood by India when the Chinese intruded into India. Now, people turn around. I've spoken to some diplomats in Delhi, and they said, well, Chinese intrusion is nothing like Russian intrusion into Ukraine. Well, yes, in the ferocity of it, yes. But an intrusion is an intrusion. It is something which is a diplomatic challenge, not just for Delhi, but Delhi's friends and partners who are today trying to tell us this is your litmus test of friendship. Third, India's deep ties with Russia notwithstanding, India also has ties with America. But if you do a balancing, or you do a sort of balance sheet of India-Russia ties versus India-US ties, I still believe with America, there are a lot of promises in the air. For instance, I'm quoting an eminent US political scientist, John J. Mearsheimer, who's on record to say, America created this problem in the first place. It led President Zelensky on. It has made all sorts of promises. But now there are assertive statements from America coming that not put boots on the ground. Without boots on the ground, you've made Ukraine a pawn in Russia, America, power play. And interestingly, America's bigger challenge until yesterday came from China. But China is going to be the biggest gainer of this exercise. The next point is that what is the lesson that we draw from what is happening, and China can draw from what is happening? If we see American reluctance to dirty their hands in the aftermath of Afghanistan, though ironically, America's back to Europe kind of policy was part of the design to get America kind of outlive the humiliation of Afghanistan. But now America is getting further humiliated for what it has done in Afghanistan, in Europe. So it was that we're trying to bury the ghost of Afghanistan, so we'll do a great job in Europe and outstare Russia. But Russia has gone past that. The next issue is sanctions itself, by many accounts, have their limitations. So the lesson for India is that America may be your quad partner, and I dare say in front of two diplomats here, that there is a strong leaning amongst our holy elite of South Bloc towards America because of a variety of non-diplomatic relationships that exist between people who run the country's foreign policy and their friends and whatever associates in America. But America is not going to come out as a quad member, where a lot of people seems to be getting highly excited about, well, quad is the new NATO. That was it. Even China referred to it as the Asian NATO. I'm sorry, it isn't. And if it is going to be the toothless NATO that NATO has turned out to be, then there is a lesson for India here also. And I think, people in New Delhi are smart enough. They're drawing lessons from how America is responding to the evolving situation. And therefore, there is a reluctance to get completely into the American camp. Yeah. Also, if China is drawing lessons from what Russia has done in Ukraine, would it embolden China to do the same in Taiwan? Or if not Taiwan, with 3 American aircraft carrier groups floating around out there, then maybe in the Himalayas.
Right.
So there's a lesson for us. Who's going to come to our aid? We are the only one in Quad which is facing China head on. The others are talking about China, or they've lived with the China threat like Japan for a long time.
Yeah.
But we face the challenge.
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
The next point, I need to make 4 or 5 more points. I think I have 5 minutes. I've done 2.5. The other thing is India has, apart from defense investments with Russia, and people say we have 60% dependence on Russian technology for military issues, but a SIPRI report says 85%. So therefore, if Russia decides to pull the plug at some time, then a lot of our equipment, I'm not talking of stuff in the pipeline. Fine, we have to live with the fact that CAATSA sanctions might kick in, so you can't have S-400, or we may just go in for S-400 CAATSA or no CAATSA. But the fact of the matter is there are a lot of spare parts, linkages, miniaturization of nuclear technology for the nuclear submarine that Russia has leased to us. So there are a lot of other issues that are closely linked to our security. Because if we abandon Russia,
No, Mr. Raza, you are actually bringing in a lot of points which we will anyway come to during the discussion.
No, so let me complete, because you said 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so if we go with Russia, then yes, America is going to do a lot of brandishing of its swords. But if we don't go with Russia, then Russia goes with China, and even Pakistan, and Imran Khan's strategically timed visit to Moscow was a case in point. And finally, we have lived with taking a non-aligned position, even in the 50s and 60s when we were a weak economy, when we were militarily weak. We in principle stood our ground. Why are we being asked to make choices now? Is it because we all speak English, so therefore we understand what the Western media says? Or is it because going and studying in Russian and Ukrainian universities is not language-centric, useful to our youth? So therefore, to hell with Russia. I think the central point is that if we have to be a great power in future, we have to carve our own space. Did France go along with America in Gulf War II? No. Who went with America without a UN resolution, got hold of a handful of small countries and called it a coalition of willing? So let's look at all that and then say, why should India be pushed into making us stand?
Right. Thank you. Just one point. I think China did vote with Russia on a UN resolution in the current situation. They did vote with Russia. They didn't abstain every time.
No.
Not mistaken.
Okay, fine. So that's good for Russia.
That's one point. Yeah. That's one. We'll move on. We'll come back to this. Just wanted to make that point. And Sir Ganpati, I think it's the floor is yours now, and please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dakshinamurthy. It's always a pleasure to talk to Federal and Pudiya Talamurai. Of course, after the 2 big guns are fired, I have very little ammunition in my kitty to come up with. I but have to entirely agree with what Ambassador Srinivasan said and Mr. Maruf Raza said. Of course, they are all far more thinking personnel who appear regularly in various debates and various other places. So for me, I think it's left to pick up the pieces which might have been left behind. And from that point of view, I just want to bring in 2 comparisons, in the sense we are currently in the UN Security Council last year and this year. And of course, on the current conflict, we have abstained in each of the resolutions which was brought to a vote, be it in the UN Security Council or in the UN General Assembly. But we should also not forget the fact that when in 2011-12, we were again in the Security Council, which Ambassador Srinivasan was there as a member, as the Deputy Permanent Representative at the UN. I think we similarly abstained in 4 of the resolutions which were brought out against the former Yugoslavia. And I was those days posted in Belgrade, and we used to correspond regularly with PMI New York and with MEA. So I think just on the basis of the voting pattern, if one were to say that our foreign policy is afflicted by weakness and there's this, we're on the haunts of a dilemma, I think it would be entirely facetious to talk of that. Because I think if you even look at it, the very fact that you have had leaders talk to our leaders and various chancelleries talk to our ambassadors and ambassadors in Delhi talk to our foreign ministry shows that not only India's vote carries, but India's voice also has a place in the Committee of Nations. Coming to the other point, of course, I think Ambassador Srinivasan mentioned about Afghanistan, which is very, very significant because I remember Giscard d'Estaing was the chief guest at the 1980 Republic Day function. And people thought that Mrs. Gandhi would make a reference to Afghanistan. But I think even then, our leadership had clearly maintained that if we have differences with a country, we take it up privately and do not bring it to the fore. And that also brings to the point Mr. Jaswant Singh's reference to the fact that India does not believe in megaphone diplomacy. And that is what has been seen here. I think we have had our Prime Minister talk to President Putin twice. He did speak to, Mr. Zelensky spoke to our Prime Minister also. Mr. Dmytro Kulba, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, also spoke to our Foreign Minister. And of course, not to mention the many calls from across the Atlantic. Now, the nub of the point which has arisen now is, of course, NATO's expansion, which we saw it expanding from 16 to 30 members between 1990 and 2020, the last being North Macedonia. And if you look at the various references to the formation of NATO itself, be it the statement of George Kennan or Jack Matlock or Henry Kissinger's article of July 2014, or many others, Zbigniew Brzezinski himself had talked of this point that Ukraine was not an ideal ideal country for NATO membership. And if it had happened, it would create more complications with Russia. And I don't think you can sort of say that Kissinger, George Kennan, Jack Matlock, or Zbigniew Brzezinski and many others, Meir Scheimer, whom Maruf Raza mentioned, his speech at the University of Chicago, they are not dimwits by any stretch of imagination. These are all thinking people, even though we might have had serious differences with Kissinger in 1971. So obviously, this is very, very important that this is the nub of the issue, and this is where the problems have arisen. I won't like to, of course, repeat what has been talked of by Ambassador Srinivasan and Mr. Maruf Raza, but on Quad, I think it is very important also to look at two references to Quad. When Sergei Lavrov had come to India in April 2021, he was viscerally critical of Quad, but when the same Lavrov was here on December 6, 2021 with President Putin, Quad was not mentioned, but AUKUS was mentioned. Similarly, if you see the February 4 joint statement between China and the Russian Federation, Quad is not mentioned, even though they mention blocks, but AUKUS has been severely criticized. Similarly, we have to go to the Quad Melbourne meeting between the foreign ministers. And I think it is very interesting that in the joint press conference between Dr. Jaishankar and Maris Payne, the last question asked of Dr. Jaishankar was, what about Ukraine? He said, get your geography right. Quad deals with Indo-Pacific. That's all. The questioner repeated it, he said, get your geography right. Coming to the US State Department, if you look at Donald Lu's deposition before the Senate 3 days ago, I think it was very, very interesting that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and Donald Lu were uniformly of the view that relationship with India was significant. And this was all happening after the voting in the UN Security Council and in the UN General Assembly. So I think when you look, of course, Ambassador Srinivasan referred to the Quad Summit 2 days ago. Again, Quad's formation was with an Indo-Pacific agenda. And if you look at the agreed joint statement, I think the differences were glossed over, you would say. But I think for each of the four partners, despite the differences between the three of them and one on the other, Quad would continue to be relevant. Coming to the point of Russia, there's no doubt that Indo-Russian relations are very strong. I do remember that when we carried out the nuclear tests in 1998, I was posted in Moscow at that time. And Yeltsin, in one of his immediate TV remarks on May 12th, had said, he thumped the table with his finger. He had three fingers, some fingers blown off. He said, India Padval Mini, that is, India let me down. But within a couple of days, things had totally changed. And the entire Russian officialdom said, we support you, we are very happy with you, and we will go with you. So I think relationship with Russia cannot be discounted, and the significance, of course, of that was brought forward by Mr. Maruf Raza. The point on Russia-China relations, it's very, very interesting to see two reports which have appeared in the South China Morning Post and the Asian Nikkei. Asian Nikkei was written by Kausikan Bilahari, who was the former permanent secretary in the Singapore Foreign Ministry. It just came, I think, 4 or 5 hours ago, whether China was bluffed by Russia on the timing of the if I could quote, the special military operation, so to say. And I think, despite whatever it is, if it comes, push were to come to a shroud on balancing the relationship of Russia with China and with India, my own hunch is that Russia would still continue to have a soft corner for India.
Right.
There's a very interesting point, which was also made by one of the senior Russian diplomats in Moscow in 1996, when we had called on him in terms of China. And what he said, that the policy of China vis-a-vis India is made by the PLA. Of course, even if it's PLA, it is the Politburo which makes it, but the head of the defense, PLA, would be the Central Military Commission, and you know who the head of it is. And the PLA would also play a singularly important role, despite the political proximity of relations with Russia. PLA would be involved. And I entirely agree with Mr. Maruf Raza that Russia will never be ready to take a junior partnership with China. And that difference, if you talk to many Russians, I think that feeling is very, very strong. I mean, this is a marriage of convenience because the West has pushed Russia eastwards. I think while Nato tries to expand eastwards, Russia is equally being pushed eastwards. But
that's
in this particular scenario, I would just conclude by the fact that I would never for a moment believe that there has been any weakness in the formulation and execution of India's foreign policy, taking into consideration this particular development between Ukraine and Russia. And I think this particular action would continue. Of course, we don't know how things will develop in the coming days, and we'll see where it would head to.
I think the problem also has a lot to do with expectations. If you look at India pre-2014, in fact, India was once in a while termed as a soft state and all that, and then there was also this move to project India to project a muscular policy, so to speak, by the current government in Delhi. So the expectations probably went much high. And one would have imagined that India would really come out in a far more forthright fashion. But it appears that it's really nothing much has changed. So probably is this also a reason why there's a perception that India is in a kind of a fix, because we really haven't really got a clear idea what, where India stands as far as foreign policies. So Mr. Srinivasan, what's your take on it?
Well, I don't think so. I don't get that feeling. Because we are only a one player in the international state, and we have to keep an eye on everyone. I have a book on more diplomacy where I have got sort of narrated it in a Shakespearean play style. First act, second act, third act, fourth act, etc. So it is like that. Things change. Characters appear from nowhere. and complicates matters. And that is part of foreign policy making. And our triumph depends on how you are able to handle it. If the situation in the fourth act had prevailed, with Trump there and demonetization and so on, people would have thought that this government would not win an election again. But look at the dramatic changes. With Pakistan's help, he was able to project a much better image and won the election. He may have won the election also because of the free gas and the free electricity, etc. But more than that, the image of this 56 inches man standing up for India, I think helped it. So challenges are actually sometimes in our favor. And that is the kind of situation that we are going through. So I don't think that we have wavered or we have not been sure. Of course, the Prime Minister doesn't speak about some of these things, like Ladakh, where he is embarrassed. He doesn't talk about it. But it must be in his mind as to how to get out of this. And also Afghanistan. So 2 failures we have already faced. And and how we are able to manage and remain relevant is the test.
Yeah, a subclause to this question would be this, that, there's a view that India is muscular only as far as Pakistan is concerned. And as far as the rest of the world is concerned, it really doesn't seem to be the case. So how do you react to that, Mr. Raza?
Well, there could be some merit in that view, because I've always argued that India punches well below its weight in geopolitics. Take, for example, the case of Israel. People might say Israel has America's backing, but it's a much smaller country, came into being about the same time as us, but it's developed resources of its own to be able to take on a range of threats, at least until yesterday, from the Arab world. Now, there was once a seminar in which a Bangladeshi diplomat also complained about the fact that, New Delhi has a colonial mindset still. So he thinks it is that imperial powers in Delhi and its writ should run accordingly in its zone of influence. But having stood up to China on 2 occasions, one is what we call Doklam, or you call Dokala, and more recently at Galwan, it has shown that, there is more at stake than to be able to just sort of take on Pakistan. Also, for whatever the other limitations or faults, the Modi government has shown that they are willing to go beyond the normal expectations in foreign policy. That means Pakistan kept needling you under the premise that you won't react because Pakistan boasted of a nuclear umbrella. But then the post-Uri strikes took place, the Balakot strikes took place, so we've blown a hole through their so-called argument of nuclear umbrella. We don't have the resources yet to be a global player. So, what's the point in trying to champion the case of this, that, and the other, which goes beyond your area of strategic influence, which to me runs from the Gulf region to the Straits of Malacca and northwards up to beyond little Himalayan region. So that's where we can influence things if we are required to. We don't have deep pockets like China to be able to buy friends, even amongst those who are our enemies. I have argued, certain misplaced priorities in the past and tried to become a player in Afghanistan with whatever investments, while we ignored our neighborhood. So I believe we need to consolidate the first sphere of interest, that is our immediate neighborhood, and then our extended neighborhood. But those who believe that we can hang to America's coattails and become a great power, I'm sorry, that is not how the world expects you to act if you're going to be given the respect of a great power. But we need to develop many more resources, including the ability to indigenize and produce our own set of military equipment. Therefore, allowing us to wean away from Russia in due course of time. But there is more to it than just make in India announcements. So we need to actually get our act together if we really wish to achieve what a checklist to become a great power is required. You can do moral grandstanding, and we are very good at that. So the fact is that world will accept even non-moral grandstanding by countries that pay their bills. But they will not accept moral grandstanding by countries that may have a very high moral equation, but don't bail them out when they are in a crisis.
Okay, I think that's well put. So, Mr. Kanpati, I was also thinking of this issue of non-alignment. Would it, what kind of a difference would it be between, say, a non-aligned nation and a neutral nation? I mean, would that be, way out where you are free to take a call? I mean,
I think neutral means you don't take sides at all. You just keep
absolutely.
quiet. I think that doesn't help you at all. The very fact that we were able to make some statements in the United Nations, as it stepped up, these statements got louder and louder. I mean, it did, of course, not go to the extent which the US would have wanted, and it did not stop off what the Russia would not have wanted us to do. So obviously, I think neutrality is not an issue which we should even dabble with, because we are not Austria, Switzerland, or even Sweden or whatever. I think we have a role to play, and that is where I think sometimes balancing of interests becomes very, very important. Of course, the problem which comes up, you asked about the question of expectations. Yes. I think that is a major issue which we face. I think we have to stand on our own feet, be economically strong. There should be greater, political consensus on various issues. Of course, we in our postings always say that is a national consensus on foreign policy. But when it comes to, small debates or big debates in parliament or during elections, I think you can see the differences between various political parties, and that becomes a major issue for us. I think so, unless you are not able to stand on your own feet, strengthen your economic, defense, and other fields, and the soft power, of course, education and the like, I think you'll always not only come short of expectations from within your own country, but also from friends you would like to make across the global community. And this has been witnessed. I think Africa is a case in point. We have done very well in Africa because we have not we have not taken the route of exploitation of their natural resources. Ours has been not exploitative of their extractive industries. We have used capacity building, which has stood us well. But even there, we have sometimes come short of delivery. We have not been able to do what they would have liked us to do. And, we do have pious declarations in many of our joint statements. I mean, that's been our job to write in that. But carry forward those, what we have talked of in terms of delivery has been a major problem. But the very fact that you have countries in the former Eastern Bloc, you talk of, say, Russia, definitely starting with Russia or Poland or Serbia or many of the other states. And also on the Western side, countries like Australia or France, Germany, talking to us and trying to woo us to one or the other side, shows the fact that our policy, despite whatever you may say, does not come up to expectations or not, is very sound, is very balanced, and is accepted in the corridors of power in various countries.
That's fine. But, there's a question here. The question is, people of Ukraine seem to be, coming back to Ukraine, people of Ukraine seem to be caught between a hurt Russia and an expansionist Nato. So why a country like India is unable to fully speak out and do something actionable, that identifies common Indians with Ukrainians? Is it because we have lost our moral compass that was built into our foreign policy? Mr. Srinivas.
Well, what are the possibilities with Ukraine? I've been wondering, because putting your eggs in the Ukrainian basket is not something that is desirable. But one point before I go, because I need to leave, is about the Russia-China relationship. I think it is much more significant than we acknowledge, because this is going to present a big issue for us, particularly if it is going to be Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan axis, and the so-called Chinese Quad. People say, no, it will not happen, etc. But I have this feeling that this is going to alter our vision of the post-COVID world. What we thought was that there would be a Cold War between China and the United States, and we will stand somewhere in the middle, seeking another pole with the support of countries like Russia, France, Germany, maybe Brazil. So a kind of middle power coalition would balance to the strategic autonomy approach. This, I think, has been shattered, because now we are standing outside this binary world which is developing, China and Russia on the one hand and the United States. And therefore, we'll have to relook at all these issues. And so I think we are witnessing or feeling the birth pangs of a new world order. And therefore, things are not very clear to us. And that is the reason why we have to have diplomacy, strong military, big economic power. All these we have to develop in a very short while. That is a challenge I see in that.
Yeah, I mean, taking off from your point, is if you like a big existential threat that India today faces is from China, and it's we have seen it in the last couple of years. Now the point is that if India aligns with the US, there is a kind of what kind of a pressure can the US put on China, which is what India is hoping by being part of the Quad. Or you have a relationship with Russia, which India hopes will will be through Russia, hope to stall China. So from that point of view, from a foreign policy point of view, if India had to make a choice, who would be in a better position to control China? Would it be the US? Because the US too has its own way of dealing with China, which it has dealt with since the Second World War. Now, or Russia, with whom there is a new bonhomie that one is seeing. I think Maruf Raza might want to
I'll just come to that. I just want to add to briefly to the point Ambassador Srinivasan has made, and that is that for long after the Cold War, many people in India, at least, especially in academic circles, were hankering for a multipolar world. It had become a unipolar world. Then you saw a bipolar world. Now, whatever the reasons, and a variety of reasons, we are now looking at a multipolar world order. So what are we complaining about? The second thing is that your question about who is in a better position to control China, I would put my bet on Russia. And I'll tell you why. Because the limits of US power have been exposed in Europe. If you go back to Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, the US is going in for a strategic stretch. And if you go in for a strategic overstretch, something gives in somewhere. Now, the US, is it going to contain China over Taiwan? Or will it dirty its hands over the Himalayas? I think American interests are more deeply tied to East Asia, that is China, Japan, and Korea, than here. And interestingly, having written a book on India-China relations, I see certain strands, which are very prominent strands, that existed before the Chinese conflict of 62 or the invasion of 62, as have been the case in the last few years. One of them was how China perceived India becoming very much part of the US camp. Now, Panditji did set aside a proposal by Eisenhower to involve India more intrinsically to the American sort of security network against the communist bloc. But the fact of the matter is that the various US-centric initiatives in Tibet that were used via India as a launchpad and through the US embassy in particular in Delhi were seen as by China as a real challenge. Apart from the fact that the intelligence inputs that were being provided by India to the US and UK, that was being interestingly passed on back to Moscow and then to China by people like Kim Philby sitting in the UK, were also seen by China that put India in its place quickly before it becomes too big for China to handle in terms of US support to India. Of course, there are arguments that John Galbraith, as the US ambassador in India, did not respond adequately to India's request for air support when the Chinese invasion was coming down to the plains of Assam. But the last point is that, it is said that when Mr. Putin made his short 6-hour, very heavily potent visit to Delhi recently to meet Mr. Modi, one of the ideas that he threw up is that if you allow me, I could help become the bridge between you and China. And we could initiate something called a Russia-China-India arrangement, just like the SCO is, or the BRICS is, or whatever else. Because, there are a number of areas that India does engage with these countries, just like India is engaging with Quad. I don't know what came out of it, but it is said by people who are informed that that was a possibility that was in the air. So, having said all that, I think at this point of time, we have more to gain by sticking with Russia. In the long run, we stayed with Russia, but that did not stop America from coming to us and by saying that we are the partner for the 21st century. Whether Obama said it or Condoleezza Rice said it or whoever else did, the bottom line is that America, even today, needs India more in Asia Pacific and Asia in particular than India needs America.
Yeah, that's Mr. Srinivasan. Before you leave, I would like you to know your view on this about who will be able to.
India. In fact, that was the proposal. In fact, Mr. Putin promised that he will arrange a summit of the three countries. But that is a thing of the past. Now, after what he has done with China, this cannot happen in a hurry. In any case, we are rather allergic to all these mediation efforts. After Tashkent, I think we have burnt our fingers. And so I don't think the Prime Minister would have been overjoyed by that. And he is also aware of our problems with China. And we may not have been very keen about it, but it is true that he had suggested it. And if all these things had not happened, maybe it could have taken place. In fact, was it suggested that the ideal would be that the four countries should meet. Why only RIC? Why not US also? And that will be the thing, a contribution that India can make. And India is capable of doing that. At least there was a time when that was possible. So maybe we'll move on to that kind of a grouping to save the world from all these miseries. But first, Putin has to let us off.
No, but on the larger point of who can influence China in favor of India more, the US or Russia? I mean, is it the?
I think I would say United States, because Russia, first of all, it doesn't have the strength. And secondly, if they have these tendencies to align with China in certain circumstances, which Americans will never do. So I would say it's better to depend on the United States rather than Russia to fight the Chinese.
Okay. That's a very interesting argument. And Mr. Ganpati, now I think we would like to hear your say on this.
I think
we'll catch up with Gunnar later. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you.
No, I think it's for me, Russia has always been very, very important. Of course, having dealt with East Europe for nearly 16 years of my professional career, I think the sympathy and empathy with Russia would be largely more than what would be with the United States of America. If you look at it, of course, it's not only the 6-hour Putin visit of December 6th, but also the joint statement, of course, even though it was the last paragraph, refers to the Russia, India, China triangular relationship. Russia is very keen that this relationship flourish. Of course, our major problem has been the lack of trust of whatever the Chinese would do. Because, I mean, despite our best intentions of having two informal summits, I mean, I feel that I'm a great votary of and supporter of informal summits, because that helps the leaders, as they say, take off their ties, kick off their shoes, and then talk informally of any item under the sun. And despite all that, despite the two informal summits, of course, the first one was very significant because it was after Dokla, April 2018. And we always believed in the fact that relationship would now be on an upswing. Then we had Mamallapuram in 2019, October. And despite that, if China were to go ahead to do Galwan in April, May 2020, I think the trust factor becomes a very, very significant point. And I think that is where I think, of course, I do agree with what Ambassador Srinivasan said. We don't like mediators to talk in terms of settle problems which we might have with Pakistan or with China, because we always prefer the bilateral mode. But the point is, I think the gentle Russian nudge can always be there. And, one important point is, despite Galwan and China trying to pressurize Russia not to sell arms to India, Russia was able to send it to us, like they did during Kargil. And during Kargil, I was the Joint Secretary East Europe, so I know the significant cooperation and collaboration we had with Russia. On the United States, I think if you look at the entire spectrum of US-China relationship, I haven't noticed India at all figuring on their radar screen at all. It has been all bilateral trade. It has been so many other things. The only point which came in would have been the NSG membership or the waiver, the nuclear waiver. And the second was, of course, APEC membership and a couple of other areas. So I don't think, as of now, the US would look at trying to act as a broker, mediator, or also trying to act in terms of facilitating greater cooperation and collaboration between India and China. And that's where I think if the back channel, if Putin were to use the back channels or Russia were to use the back channels with China to bring some semblance of rationality in Chinese thinking vis-a-vis India, that would be of greater benefit. Of course, the Quad with greater focus on Indo-Pacific also rules out the possibility of America being the honest broker between India and China.
Interestingly, this talk of India, China, and Russia. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add briefly that, with respect to Ambassador Srinivasan, that, after what he's done in Ukraine, Mr. Putin stands to hold no credibility in the eyes of the world as a peacemaker. But really, that may be in the eyes of the world as a peacemaker. But if he can give us a deal to contain China and not fulfill its long-standing ambition to acquire more and more of Indian territory, and if he can arrange that, either because of his leverage with President Xi Jinping, or, Russia is still militarily not a pushover, and various other things. It's a nuclear weapon power with a P5 vote in UN. So if he can get us a deal and we only get announcements from Washington, then I would go with a deal where somebody can get the pressure off us and our troops on the front lines.
Right. Of course, that's what, good.
One quick point, if I might add, I think on Putin, China, it's very, very significant. The treaty which was signed in July 2001, Article 6 refers to Taiwan, and the same wording you find in the joint statement. Article 9 of the Sino-Russian Treaty of 2001 is word for word taken from the Article 9 of the Indo-Soviet Treaty, which does not exist in the Indo-Russian Treaty of 1993. Of course, Article 9 has now been merged with Article 4, and it's been diluted to that extent. So I think China has got a fulsome support from Russia on Taiwan, and that is where China would go more with Russia than with the USA, because it feels that USA would have its own agenda vis-a-vis China, and Russia would like to seek China's support, and maybe China would see what it can give in the bargain.
Right. Talking of India, China, and Russia, what Putin may have spoken to, Mr. Modi. That's one thing. But there is another informal axis that is already at work, which the India-US-Israel axis. So, and today, if you look at the global scenario, the geopolitically, and this is considered to be a very powerful grouping at a very subdued or a subterranean level, the India, Israel, US axis. So how do you play one against the other? So India is there in both. So, and both are contradictory, it looks like they're contradictory grouping. So, I mean,
no, geostrategically, I don't think they're contradictory. The reason is that India, US, Israel is more about technology transfers, defense deals, etc., etc. I mean, India, Israel, US is not going to help solve a problem with Pakistan or with China. And I'll tell you why. Because the US has a blind spot for Pakistan. Despite all these years and all this bonhomie between Indian and US leaders, our diplomats and military men and whatever else, the fact is that the US has not been able to discipline Pakistan. A simple way they could discipline Pakistan is to deny visas to all military officers of Pakistan and their family members, and education facilities in US universities and medical facilities, and tell them, okay, you went to shake hands with Putin, now go for medical treatment to Russia. And you'll see how Pakistan's generals get tamed. I'm not saying this. Christine Fair, an expert on Pakistan, has said that in one of her writings. The second thing I'd like to say is that as far as the US is concerned, I brought that up earlier, it's here, there, and everywhere and trying to chew too much. Whereas India, Russia, China will serve two of our immediate strategic purposes in terms of threat. Of course, there is a possibility it can get China to wean away from its Himalayan ambitions, though they are Mao's diktat. And Mao Zedong had said that Tibet is the palm of my right hand.
Right.
And, the 5 fingers, which is Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, Arunachal, must be acquired. But I think China is moving away from Maoism in a rapid order. The second thing is Russia can also contain Pakistan to some extent, not just by not supplying weapon systems to Pakistan, that they'll get it from China because China's biggest arms market is Pakistan. But Russia can also put leverage on Pakistan and how much it can achieve or not achieve in Afghanistan, which is Pakistan's other bigger goal, its own strategic agenda. So I feel I'm going to sleep with the devil if it serves my purpose. And for the moment, Mr. Putin appears to be the devil.
The other interesting thing is that at a very policy level and at a very realistic level, if I may add, India needs to be closer to Russia. But at a popular level, the fact that India is a democracy, the US is a democracy, any middle-class family today in India has, their whole lorry loads of relatives and friends in the US. And you have a person of Indian origin, who's now the vice president of the US. So if you look at this at a very popular level, there is always been this contradiction between what the government is looking at or the policy is looking at in terms of what you said about Russia and Russia being more important as far as India is concerned. Or and then you have the US and the idea of antagonizing the US or making a break with the US on a very hard policy level. How do you see this contradiction? I mean, isn't it? Don't you find this also coming in the way of a clear-cut, way forward? I mean, policy. I mean, Mr. Ganpati, would you like to take this?
I think first of all, I should say that any Indian origin leader in any powerful democracy has never always been a friend of India. You take senators who try to needle you on various issues, human rights and other things. I mean, so I think I'm always wary of Indian origin leaders elsewhere, you see, except maybe Mauritius, where I had the privilege of serving. I think they look at India from a different point of view totally. But in the UK, I mean, or even in, of course, USA naturally, even in Australia for that matter. So we have had difficulties with Indian origin leaders. So I think that is the first point I would like to make. Second, on democracies, I think this is where the problem comes up. I mean, when you talk of democracy, when you talk of free press there, I mean, none of the American organizations or agencies have given us a good chit at all, starting from the leaders. So I would be wary of that. You know, the leadership can be very happy but the leadership is there for 4 years or 8 years at the maximum, and they change. And the other point is, of course, we have always begun very well with a democratic leadership in the USA, but it's been the Republicans who have always come up, who have not come up short.
Yeah.
So I think it is a very difficult issue to say that only two democracies can thrive at the cost of a democratic country not being able to promote its relationship with a non-democratic country. I mean, of course, you tell China and Russia that they are not democracies. If you recall, again, I recall the joint statement, they think that they are the biggest democracy in the world. Of course, between Xi Jinping and Putin, I think Putin is a Democrat for all practical purposes, because Putin has been elected, whatever be it, not by 99.99%, that is as it used to be in the Soviet days, but Xi Jinping gets his 99. I don't think they have elections of that sort in the People's Republic of China.
Right.
So I think two democracies do get along well on various other factors like market forces and things like that. Yes, there are greater understanding. I don't think we have a difficult relationship today with the United States, America, Germany, France, or many others. But at the same time, we have a vibrant relationship with, say, the Russian Federation. I think that would never, should never be forgotten. Of course, the crucial point which would come up is the defense cooperation with Russia would continue to be strong, but in the long run, not immediately, maybe after a year, 2, 3 years, what sort of, if the sanctions continue, what sort of impact it would have on the Russian Federation, that would be a point to note. Of course, they have moved out from all the SWIFT and things like that to the SIPs and the SFMT and all that. So I think, so we'll have to, the immediate repercussions of these sanctions, because that is an important point we'll have to take into account, is not going to be there at all. And of course, if we have been able to counter sanctions very adequately in 1998 and 99, I don't think the Russians are going to be even, are going to lose their sleep over sanctions. So I think the sum and substance of it is, yes, two democracies need to get along together, but democracies always are also guided by the public opinion in their countries. And that is where the problems sometimes come up.
Right. You know, I mean, I would agree with you, but the point is that at a very popular level, I mean, what I'm saying is, say, for instance, English is it's a common language. So they can very easily communicate to India or to influence our, way of thinking, which the Russians cannot, because, really there's a huge gap there. So what I'm trying to basically say is that, is this a factor, is this proximity at a popular level versus the, the geo compulsions, so to speak, would that be a role? I mean, Maruf, Mr. Raza?
No, in fact, I agree with Ambassador Ganpati. And let me give you a few other things. When we did the nuclear tests, America was very upset because they had made, as once one of his senior colleagues had said on a television show, I remember watching him 30, 40 years ago, that, the West wants to control geopolitics in a circle that runs from Vancouver to Vladivostok. So in that, it is the weapon, and therefore the NPT came in after India's nuclear test of 1974. They had a problem with India in so many other ways, because you are either with us or against us kind of thing, even though we continue to be neutral. And they are not willing to look at the fact that we went into a relationship with Russia in 1971, around September.
Right.
After Kissinger had opened the doors for engagement with China through Pakistan's help. and that led to Nixon's engagement with China, and everything else is history. When we did the nuclear test in 98, so one of the journalists asked the late and distinguished Mr. Jaswant Singh, so, sir, what do you have to say about America's threat of sanctions? Madeleine Albright was one of those who strongly against India having gone nuclear. If they really loved democracies, here was another democracy becoming strong, but they had a problem with it. Jaswant Singh said in his classic style, sanctions? What sanctions? Which means that we had lived with sanctions all along. Interestingly, Putin and the Russian regime right now has been living with sanctions from the last decade or so. Now, let me tell you about affiliations with leaders and their origins. Vice President Kamala Harris will not stop at trying to lecture us on human rights, freedom, etc., as per American yardsticks. I love visiting museums. And one of the museums that I visited in Washington was called Newseum, which is the news museum.
Yes, I've been there.
Right? And the evolution of news and its dissemination across the world from radios and newspapers and telegraph and whatever else. Now, in that, there is a map of the world which shows what level of freedom exists in which country. I was shocked to see that India was shown to have only half the levels of freedom that would touch the 100% mark. So we're around 50, 60%. Right. So a lot of people in America feel that we may be democracy, but we don't have the kind of freedom that America has, though all of us can go and get around and do anything short of murder. That is the hard reality of India. Now, let me tell you about affiliation with American language, etc., etc. If that be the case, why is everybody in India buying Chinese pharmaceuticals, Chinese phones, Chinese air conditioners, Chinese-made television sets, and even cars that are actually made in China, but have names of their original company, which may have been British or wherever else. So, it may be that it's nice to send your children to American universities and get an MBA from a good university, Ivy League and medicine and all that stuff. And that works well for your ambitions. But what is the level in terms of percentage of people who can afford this engagement with them? Right. And who is it the political establishment is today targeting? Is it targeting people who can send their children to Ivy League? Or is it targeting children who are buying Chinese cell phones?
Right.
So there is an issue there. And finally, let me tell you, let's get a little real. Ambassador Ganpati has rightly brought out that leaders of Indian origin, they have to guard their own political standing and constituency.
Right.
And I'm not being too rude, but their parents and forefathers left India because India wasn't the happiest place for them to grow. And that is a legacy those families carry. Right. So it is not exactly that you may like to make a visit to your aunts and whoever else, but at the end of the day, that was the land of opportunity you went, which India did not give you the opportunity. Right. So I'm being very blunt, but if you look at all those things, then you'll realize that we get carried away because of the media blowing up an odd comment like Chittima.
Yeah, about opportunities, even now, the students are going to Ukraine, so that still continues the lack of opportunities. But anyway, that's another story. But coming back to the original question. So, what do we do with the foreign policy? Do we leave it as it is? You think there is no need to take a look? If you can quickly summarize it and also make it your concluding remarks, that will be great, Mr. Ganpati.
Yeah, I think just quickly 2 points on Mr. Jaswant Singh. One, I think I was present in the margins of many discussions, some of the discussions he had in Moscow with Mr. Stroke Talbot. And, the other comment which Madeleine Albright had said was that India has dug itself into a deep hole. Mr. Jaswant Singh, in his military voice, booming voice, said, Madam Secretary doesn't understand Indian culture. And I remember he was in Warsaw for the Conference of Democracies meeting. And I had gone to Warsaw as Joint Secretary East Europe. He kept Madeleine Albright waiting. And the moment Mr. Jaswant Singh stepped up with the lift, she came running to him and hugged him. So, you know, standing for a principle or standing strong on your principle does always get to the bonus points. And that is where I think it's very, very important that what we are doing now is to a large extent correct foreign policy, which is the, you call it non-alignment, or you call it balanced, or you call it clear-headed. And that is what it has been always, I won't go for neutral. Neutral means you don't take a stand. And that is where I think, going back to the basic premise of how we started the discussion, Ambassador Tirumurthy's statement, was calibrated up, but the sum and substance of it was legitimate security interests, UN Charter, rule of law, and also sovereignty and territorial integrity. And then nobody could argue or quibble with that, because that shows realism. It may be idealism, but that is what realism is today all about, because you have to be realistic in how you execute your foreign policy. Last but not least, your supreme national interest is second to none. I think whatever be it, that is how, Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh, when we were asked to sign the CTBT, said, not now, not ever, never. I think supreme national interest should always govern a foreign policy. And I don't think we are wide off the track. But foreign policy also needs a lending arm, and that is strengthen yourself economically, strengthen yourself defense-wise, your education and your soft power. I think that will always stand you in good stead.
Thank you, Mr. Ganapathy. Mr. Raza.
Well, I just want to make 3 points which were not made earlier by me. One is that, our non-alignment from the 80s and 90s started being replaced by what we call strategic autonomy. More recently, Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar has spoken about multi-alignment. So therefore, the point is that we don't need to continue to be in a box. We'll take positions as and when required on what is suiting our interest. 2, we can actually be a swing state. Now, a swing state is, as Bharat Karnad has said in his book, Why India is Not a Great Power Yet. Right? Yeah. He said, why do you need to constantly tie yourself in a particular position? Look at the case of America. It does all this grandstanding on a number of issues. And then it finds that it has cornered itself into those positions. So, the rule of law, democracy, and everything. They held a democracy summit recently.
Right.
Who did they invite other than India? Pakistan. But they did not invite Bangladesh and Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
They didn't invite Singapore because they felt it didn't have a multi-party system. But Singapore, at least, is a country that functions. So again, this whole mesmerized approach towards democracy is something I don't have a passion for. Democracy is good up to a point where it doesn't stifle you and you're not shut up and locked up like you and I could be for making the comments we're making right now. But, democracy can also translate into your country being a functional anarchy that India is often seen as by outsiders. So we have to have our own position. We don't have to go with, these concepts of governance and rule, and therefore where we are. We have our own history, our own philosophy, our own approach to our security, geopolitics, and whatever else. And finally, to be able to take a position where we don't get arm twisted into saying, okay, you'll not go with me, so I'll stop your arms supplies. We need to, as everybody has said, and I reinforce that point, we need to get our act together and we need to go ahead and become a self-sufficient and a strong country in so many ways. One example, there were restrictions put on our missile program.
Right.
And because of MTCR and everything else. So we then became a producer of missile systems, which is now often being asked for by other countries. And even China expresses concern. The BrahMos missile is a case in point. But look at the Agni program, look at the various other programs, look at our ability to send satellites into space, look at our ability to get to the moon or the Mars. You know, we will get there. So the point is, if India is put under restrictions, it could be in the short term, might appear worrying, but in the long term, it will get the best out of us Indians.
Right. Thank you. So we are actually having this discussion in the middle of a very serious situation in Ukraine. And also right now, as we speak, I think our foreign policy is right now getting tested. And by the time this whole issue blows over, with the invasion ends and peace returns, I think we'll be far wiser as to where we still stand. And I think it's really something, whichever way it goes, my own gut feeling is that it is going to make some kind of an impact. And probably we have already discussed that at length today. And it was great having you on the panel, Mr. Raza and Mr. Ganpati as usual. And it was really enlightening. And thank you so much for making it. Thank you.
Thank you.